I still remember exactly where I was standing when the message came through. In our kitchen of 29 years, stirring cream into my morning coffee while gazing at the garden I'd planted when we first moved in. The hydrangeas were just starting to bloom. 3 chimes from my phone, a text from him. I'm filing for divorce today. Already spoke to a lawyer. It's better this way. Don't try to call. My hand froze mid-stir. Coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug onto the granite countertop he'd insisted on during our remodel 5 years ago. The one I thought was too expensive, but he'd said we deserved it after all these years. 29 years of marriage ended in 23 words. I remember thinking it had to be some kind of mistake, a cruel joke, or maybe he'd been hacked. I called him immediately, of course, despite his instruction not to. Straight to voicemail. I called his office. His secretary, Monica, whom I'd sent Christmas gifts to for over a decade, told me in an oddly rehearsed voice that he was unavailable and in meetings all day. Something cold settled in my stomach, something that felt like knowledge. With trembling fingers, I opened our banking app. The joint checking account where my husband's business income flowed, where my small part-time bookkeeping income went, where all our household expenses came from. Emptied. The savings account we'd built over decades, drained to the required $100 minimum to keep it open. $237,000. Gone. I sat down hard on our kitchen stool, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The world tilted sideways and then righted itself in terrible clarity. This wasn't spontaneous. This was calculated, planned, executed with surgical precision while I slept beside him last night, unaware that I was lying next to someone planning my financial execution. But here's the part he didn't expect. Here's what makes this story different from the ones you usually hear about women my age. I'd seen it coming. Not consciously, perhaps, but something deep inside me, that primal instinct women develop after decades of marriage, had been quietly sounding an alarm for months, maybe even years. 6 months earlier, I'd noticed small changes in his behavior. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to definitively. Just changes. Password-protected spreadsheets on his laptop when he'd never bothered before. Late nights at the office that he vaguely attributed to tax planning long after tax season had passed. New cologne. A gym membership he actually used. Weekend golf outings that left no evidence. No muddy shoes. No receipts from the clubhouse bar, where he and his friends usually had a drink afterward. The classic signs were all there. I just hadn't wanted to name them. But while I hadn't consciously acknowledged what was happening, some deeper part of me was already preparing, already laying groundwork, already taking steps to protect myself from exactly this scenario. 3 months before that text message, I'd met with a financial advisor. I told my husband it was to discuss retirement planning. And it was, in a way. Just not the retirement he envisioned. At your age, the advisor had told me, with your years out of the workforce raising children, you're vulnerable, especially with most assets in your husband's name. I'd nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief at having someone finally name the fear I'd been carrying. What can I do? The advisor, a woman in her 60s who'd seen this scenario play out hundreds of times, leaned forward. First, we document everything. Every account, every asset, every debt. Then we start building your financial fortress. 2 days later, I consulted a divorce attorney. Not to file, just to understand, to know my rights, to prepare, just in case the nameless dread I'd been feeling materialized. 29 years. the attorney said, reviewing my notes. "That's considered a long-term marriage in this state. That works in your favor." "I don't want a divorce," I told her quickly. "I just want to be prepared." She'd given me a gentle look, the kind that said she'd heard those exact words before, from women sitting exactly where I was, who eventually ended up needing her services. "Being prepared isn't the same as wanting something to happen," she assured me. "It's just smart." Smart. That word resonated. I'd been smart once, before I put my accounting career on hold to raise our children, before I became the support system for my husband's business ventures, before I'd gradually, imperceptibly, handed over the reins of our financial life to him. It was time to be smart again. Over the next 3 months, I became a forensic investigator of my own marriage. I documented every account, every investment, every property deed. I made copies of tax returns going back 7 years. I photographed valuable items in our home. Artwork we'd collected, jewelry he'd given me, furniture we'd inherited from his parents. I created my own email account, got a separate phone line, opened a new credit card in my name only, and most importantly, I moved money. Not all of it, not even most of it, but enough. The inheritance from my mother's estate that had been sitting in a joint investment account. I moved half to a new account in my name only. The retirement account from my early career that had been quietly growing. I worked with my financial advisor to ensure it was properly documented as premarital property. I didn't take anything that wasn't rightfully mine. I didn't drain accounts or hide assets. I simply secured what was undeniably mine and created a cushion, just enough to survive the earthquake I sensed was coming. And then came that text message and the emptied accounts. After the initial shock, after my hands stopped shaking and my breath returned to normal, I picked up my phone again, not to call him, but to call my attorney. "It's happening," I said simply when she answered. "Are you at home?" "Yes. Stay there, change the locks. I'm filing an emergency motion for temporary support and an injunction against disposing of marital assets. He's made a major tactical error." Within 3 hours, a locksmith had come and gone. I'd transferred the last of my personal items to my secure accounts, and I'd called our children, both in their 20s now, living their own lives, to deliver the hardest news a mother can share. Dad left. The words felt foreign in my mouth, impossible. He's filed for divorce. "What? Why?" Our daughter's voice confused and instantly tearful. "I don't know all the details yet," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I wanted you to hear it from me first." "Where's Dad now?" Our son, always practical, already moving into problem-solving mode. "I don't know that either, but I'm okay. I've got support. I need you both to focus on yourselves right now, not on me." Those conversations were the hardest part. Harder than finding new health insurance. Harder than cataloging household items. Harder than the financial calculations. Telling our children that the family they thought was solid had fractured felt like a personal failure, despite knowing I wasn't the one who detonated the bomb. The weeks that followed moved with strange duality, agonizingly slow emotionally, but blindingly fast logistically. My attorney filed our case before my husband's attorney did. Another tactical advantage. The emergency financial orders were granted, freezing what assets remained and requiring my husband to continue paying the household expenses. And then came his first legal filing in response, demanding the house be sold, claiming I'd contributed minimally to the family's financial success. asking that his business be considered separate property despite being built entirely during our marriage. The most staggering part? He claimed there was no more than $50,000 in liquid assets in our marital estate. This from the man who had just removed $237,000 from our accounts. That's when I slid the documentation across the conference room table at our first four-way meeting. Our attorneys, him, and me. Every statement, every transfer, every withdrawal. His eyes widened slightly as he scanned the papers, the only break in his otherwise stony expression. He hadn't known I had access to his online banking password. Hadn't realized I'd been silently documenting everything for months. We'll need those funds returned to the marital estate immediately, my attorney said calmly, or we'll be pursuing dissipation claims and asking for an unequal distribution in my client's favor. His attorney whispered something to him. His jaw tightened. He looked at me. Really looked at me, for the first time since this began. I saw confusion there, and something else. Respect, maybe, or fear. And he thought he'd married a woman who would crumble without him, who wouldn't know how to fight, who would accept whatever scraps he decided to throw her out of desperation and decades of financial dependence. He was wrong. The divorce process is intentionally dehumanizing. It reduces a shared life to spreadsheets and percentages. It takes sacred promises and renders them void through bureaucratic procedure. It places dollar values on years of emotional investment, on memories, on the intangible things that make a marriage. But I refuse to be reduced. I refuse to be just another statistic. Another woman in her 50s discarded after her usefulness had seemingly expired. 2 months into the process, I received another text from him, the first direct communication since that initial message. "Can we talk? Just us. No lawyers." I showed the text to my attorney. "Absolutely not," she said. "Everything through counsel. At this point." "What do you think he wants?" "They're figuring out you're not as financially vulnerable as he thought. He wants to see if he can manipulate you directly." She was right, of course. The financial affidavits had been exchanged by then. He knew I had my own accounts, knew I'd preserved some assets, knew I wasn't destitute. But he didn't yet know the full extent of my preparation. As the process continued, we uncovered more. A storage unit rented 6 months earlier, filled with artwork and antiques from our home that had mysteriously disappeared over time. I had the photographs to prove they'd once been there. A cryptocurrency account with substantial holdings, never disclosed on his financial affidavit. Credit card statements showing charges for hotels in the city where we lived. Weekend getaways that weren't business trips at all. And finally, the other woman. The classic midlife crisis affair with a woman 17 years younger. His executive assistant, not Monica from the office, but her recent replacement. The one he'd hired when Monica retired. The one whose apartment he'd been paying for with marital funds for the past 8 months. I wish I could say it didn't hurt to confirm what I'd suspected. That my preparations had somehow armored my heart against the pain of betrayal. They hadn't. Each new discovery was a fresh wound. Each piece of evidence that the life I thought we'd built together had been a facade made me question my own judgment, my own memories. Had anything been real? Had he ever truly loved me? Had the nearly 3 decades together meant anything at all? I allowed myself exactly 1 hour each day to fall apart. 1 hour of tears, of rage, of asking unanswerable questions. Usually in the shower where the sound of water could mask my sobs from nobody but myself in my empty house. 1 hour, and then back to business, back to fighting. 3 months in, We had our temporary orders hearing. I dressed simply but with purpose, not in the designer clothes he'd always pushed me to buy, but in pieces that communicated dignity and self-possession. The courtroom felt sterile, impersonal. My husband sat across the room looking somehow diminished. His attorney painted him as the victim of a vindictive wife. My attorney systematically presented the evidence of financial misconduct. The emptied accounts, hidden assets, cryptocurrency. The girlfriend he was supporting with marital funds. Then came our strategic reveal. Documentation of my revocable living trust, established months before his text. My protected inheritance. The rolled over retirement accounts. The judge's expression shifted subtly as the full picture emerged. The ruling was decisive. He would continue paying household expenses and temporary support. I would keep the house until final orders. And most satisfyingly, he had 48 hours to return every dollar he'd taken from our accounts. As we left, he muttered, "You've turned into someone I don't recognize." I met his gaze steadily. Number you just never actually knew me. That night, alone in our house, my house now, at least temporarily, I allowed myself a second hour of tears. Not from pain this time, but from a strange mixture of grief and triumph. I grieved for the marriage I'd thought I had, for the man I'd thought I married. But beneath that grief ran a current of fierce pride. I had protected myself. I had fought back. I was going to be okay. While the divorce proceeded, something unexpected happened. My daughter called one evening. "Mom, can I come over? I need your advice." When she arrived, she seemed nervous. "Mark and I are talking about getting engaged," she said, referring to her boyfriend of 3 years. "But after what happened with you and Dad, I'm scared." I made us both tea and sat beside her at the kitchen table where I'd received that text months ago. "I want to be smart," she continued, "like you were." Something bloomed in my chest, warmer than pride, deeper than vindication. I spent the evening teaching my daughter everything I'd learned about financial partnership, about protecting yourself while still committing fully to love, about balancing trust with independence. As she hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "You're my hero, Mom." That night, I slept more peacefully than I had since this all began. 2 months later, we had our settlement conference. My husband's position had weakened considerably. His financial misconduct was well documented. His continued support of his girlfriend, despite court orders working against him. We negotiated from separate rooms, attorneys shuttling between us with offers and counter-offers. I would keep the house, free and clear. I would receive 65% of the retirement accounts due to his financial misconduct. I would get half of his business interest, valued as a marital asset. I would receive substantial spousal support for 10 years. He would be responsible for $50,000 of my legal fees. It wasn't everything, but it was fair. More than fair, considering what he had initially offered, which was essentially nothing. When the final papers were drawn up and signed, when the judge approved our settlement, when the divorce decree was finally issued, I felt not happiness, not closure. Those would come later. What I felt was vindication, the system that so often fails women like me, women who have invested decades in family over career, women who have supported husbands who discard them when younger options appear, had worked this time. Not because I got lucky, but because I got smart. In the year since our divorce was finalized, I've rebuilt my life piece by piece. I went back to school to update my accounting credentials. I started a small bookkeeping business, focusing on serving other women going through divorce. I redecorated the house, purging the last physical reminders of him. The hydrangeas in the garden bloomed again this spring. I planted more, different colors, varieties I'd always wanted but he'd dismissed as too showy. Now they're a riot of blues and purples outside my kitchen window. I've learned things about myself that I never knew in nearly 3 decades of marriage. I like spicy food, which he always insisted was too much. I enjoy modern art, which he dismissed as pretentious. I love traveling solo to cities instead of the beach resorts he preferred. Every morning I make my coffee exactly how I like it, stronger than he ever tolerated, with just a touch of cream. I stir it slowly, watching the swirls settle into perfect stillness. No spills, no shaking hands, just peace. I've discovered that I'm stronger than I ever imagined, more resilient, more capable. As for him, I heard through our children that the relationship with his assistant ended 6 months after our divorce. She'd wanted marriage, apparently. He'd wanted freedom. When he couldn't deliver the life she expected, the life his divorce settlement no longer allowed him to finance, she moved on to greener pastures. He lives in a condominium now, works longer hours than ever to rebuild what he lost, calls our children on their birthdays, but forgets the small details of their lives that accumulate in the spaces between major celebrations. Last month, I ran into Monica, his former secretary, at the grocery store, the one who told me he was in meetings all day, when I called after receiving his text. "I've been wanting to apologize," she said, eyes downcast, examining the contents of her shopping cart as if they held profound interest. I knew what was happening. I should have warned you. "It's okay," I told her, surprised to realize I meant it. Everything worked out exactly as it needed to. "He's miserable now," she offered, looking up finally. "If that helps." I considered this. It doesn't help, but it doesn't hurt either. I'm just indifferent. And that was the truth. The man who once felt like the center of my universe had become a peripheral character in my story. An important part of my past, certainly. The father of my children, always. But no longer the sun around which my life orbited. I sometimes think about that morning in the kitchen. The coffee spilling, the phone chiming, the text message that ended one life and began another. If I could go back and speak to that woman, the one whose hands trembled as she checked the emptied bank accounts, I would tell her something I've come to believe with bone-deep certainty. The moment you think is breaking you is actually the moment setting you free. Here's what I want every woman watching this to understand, especially those in long-term marriages approaching retirement age. Your financial security is not a luxury. It's not selfish. It's necessary. It's your right. Know where every account is. Know what every password unlocks. Know exactly what you own independently and what you own together. Meet with a financial advisor regularly, without your spouse if necessary. Understand your legal rights in your state. Maintain some degree of financial independence, even in the happiest of marriages. Because the truth is, not all marriages last forever. And those that end after decades leave women particularly vulnerable if they haven't prepared. I was lucky, if you can call it luck. Some primitive instinct warned me to prepare before the earthquake hit. Many women aren't so fortunate. They're blindsided completely, left to pick up the pieces with no resources, no documentation, no safety net. Don't be one of them. Start today. Right now. Take one small step toward financial independence and security. Because whether your marriage lasts another 50 years or ends tomorrow morning with a text message while you're stirring your coffee, you deserve more than survival. You deserve security. You deserve peace. You deserve to stand in your worth, no matter who stays or who walks away. If you found value in my story, please subscribe to this channel for more real-life financial experiences and lessons. Comment below with your own experiences or questions. I read every comment personally. And share this video with any woman who might need to hear this message before it's too late. Remember, the best time to prepare was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.